Good evening. Good evening,
Good evening.
friends. Uh, I'm Samuel Jordan, president of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. We're broadcasting from Baltimore, the unceded territory of the Piscataway. In fact, you might call it occupied Baltimore when the governor sends the rest of his troops in. Nevertheless, that's another question altogether because tonight we're going to address a few questions regarding the legislative session that's soon to end. In fact, I think the final day for the legislative session will be the 11th of April. But it's been rigorous, and kind of a veteran of the rigors of this legislative session as our special guest. But first, our co-host, uh, Minister Glenn Smith, Vice President of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. We couldn't do it without him. But our special guest is Delegate Sheila Ruth. Delegate Ruth has been, frankly, a fantastic manager, leader, inspirational force, frankly, on a number of measures in the legislature, including our Transit Equity Act for 2022. But we'll talk with her uh, pretty much not so much an interview as a conversation, so that we can give her a sort of a break from the rigors of the legislative session. Delegate Ruth, good evening, and thank you so much for agreeing to be our host guest tonight.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. Let's do this. Uh, you have a number of measures that have been winding their way also through the legislative session. Do you want to mention the pieces of legislation that have attracted your most attention or the ones that are more or less the most important to you?
Yeah, thank you so much. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the Transportation Equity Act of 2022 in a little bit, and that one is really super important to me. Another bill that I have that is heading towards it, not quite there yet, but heading towards passage is HB 84. What that does is it modifies a law that currently allows students to be charged with a crime for disrupting school activities. So even something like talking back to a teacher or storming out of class, they can actually be arrested. And this is a factor in the school to prison pipeline. There are huge disparities. 82% of the students charged under this law are Black and brown students. So this bill, which Senator Mary Washington is sponsoring in the Senate, would protect students from being charged under this law. Any actual crimes they could still be charged with under the criminal code, but this prevents a vague um, law that's disproportionately applied and actually harms students. So that one is heading towards passage. It's passed both the Senate and the House, but in different forms. So they have to be reconciled right now.
And for
Another one.
for our audience, that's HB 84. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Is there a
Yes.
Senate uh, version or parallel?
Yes. It's SB. I believe it's SB 119.
HB 84 and SB 119. Thank you.
That's
Please
correct.
go right ahead. There
Yeah.
are some others you were mentioning.
Yeah. So the the another bill that I think is really important that is unfortunately not going to pass this year, but is a bill that would create a commission to study and create a universal healthcare system in Maryland, a state-based universal healthcare system. I think healthcare is and should be a human right, and it's not right that there are people who don't have healthcare. And then even under our current system, there are people who have health insurance who can't afford to use it because the deductibles and out-of-pocket costs are too high. And what good is health insurance that you pay for that you can't use when you get sick? So this would create a commission that would develop a plan for a universal single-payer healthcare system in Maryland that would be ready to introduce to the legislature as legislation. And would cover all Marylanders, and in a single payer system, and So this is something that's really important. This bill has been around for a number of years, but I really worked to revitalize it, put in some changes to it this year to really revitalize it and get it going. While it didn't pass, we were able to really generate a lot of excitement around it. So I'm hoping that will help us going forward.
Okay,
And I
and
guess
that one is,
I guess you want the numbers for that
yes,
one as
please.
well. Sorry,
We
that's
want to make sure that our audience can also follow up. Before we leave, we want to know if they can call legislators or if they can continue to lobby or agitate if that's what it requires. And that's
absolutely
HB.
HB 610 and SB 493. SB 493 is the Senate.
Yes. And there are some other measures that are of importance to you or that you've given a lot of attention to this session?
Well, I mean, all of my bills are important.
Of course.
The other one that is likely to pass is one that would set energy and water efficiency standards for appliances. That one's passed both the House and the Senate in the same form. Another one that's really important to me that didn't really get any traction and is one that would deal with gas stations because there are these convenience store gas stations keep springing up all over the place. And there are health and environmental impacts to gas stations that we're not really paying attention to. There's been a lot of work done in some of the areas like the underground storage tanks. There's a lot of work that's been done on those. There's vapor recovery systems. But even with that, there's a lot of recent research that shows that the benzene gas can actually spread from these gas stations further than we thought, even with vapor recovery systems. And this is a carcinogen. So this bill would have required new gas stations to be set back at least 1,000 feet from schools, daycare centers, residential areas, other sensitive land uses. And also in recognition of the fact that we're trying to move away from the fossil fuel economy and into the clean energy economy, it would have also required charging stations, electric vehicle charging stations at new gas stations.
But can we have the number for the energy and waters bill?
Yes, I'm very sorry. That HB 772.
Okay, and it does not yet have a Senate parallel.
It does. The Senate is SB 494.
Okay, so we have HB 84, HB 84, SB 119. We have HB 610 and SB 493. That's the universal health care system. And there's the energy and waters bill, HB 772 and SB 494. And that
Correct.
first bill, HB 84, Delegate Ruth, what's the title, the legislative title for that bill?
Education, Crimes on School Grounds Exemptions. It's a terrible title, honestly. And, I think that the title kind of got some people riled up because it has crimes on school grounds in it. And I think people misunderstood the intent of the bill. But even in spite of that, we were able to get it passed. And Senator Washington has been a fantastic partner working on that bill. I've learned so much from working with her.
So it seems that the legislative mix that you've been so deeply involved in and immersed in through this session have dealt with climate, environment, criminal justice, and of course, transit equity.
That's correct.
I say that because I'm recalling that at the beginning of the session, Speaker Jones and President Ferguson in the Senate declared this an equity session. Do you think that much of the legislation that was received favorably and passed during this session kept that promise?
I think a lot of it has. It's always a struggle here because trying to get things passed without them being watered down, as you know, Samuel, is always difficult. But I think that we have made a lot of good progress in terms of legislation. Now, we're still trying to get things across the line, but today we voted on juvenile justice bills. We've been moving cannabis. The final form of that is still uncertain, and hopefully the final form will be strong with some strong equity provisions, and so that the jury's still out on what that's going to look like. But I think that we have made some good progress in terms of equity. Certainly for me, equity runs through, I would say, everything that I do in one sense or another, because I think we have to consider equity in everything that we do. I think that it's essential that we look at equity as a part of everything that we do.
It is, of course. Before we step back and ask for sort of your 10,000-foot view of this session, is there any discernible pattern to the bills that got favorable treatment in this session? Is there grouping? For example, there was a lot of climate and environmental, for example, the climate change solutions now. Uh, as in the last session, so much was dedicated to TSIA. Of course, there were other bills and other measures that were passed. Is there any particular type or grouping of bills that give an identity to this session?
So I'm not sure if I can think of specific groupings. We went into the session with some big priorities, and I think that we're going to deliver to a greater or lesser extent on all of those big priorities. Cannabis legalization certainly was one of them. That's moving forward. Reproductive rights was another one. That's moving forward. We have passed a really important bill that's going to give greater access to reproductive services in communities where they may not have access, and for people who may not have access, increasing the number of providers and that sort of thing. So that's a big priority. The Time to Care Act, which is family leave, we passed that out of the House today. It has to go back to the Senate because we made some changes to it. But I think that in this case, the bill that we passed for the Time to Care Act is actually very strong and took the best of the Senate and the House versions. That's a family leave act so that people will be able to take up to 12 weeks of paid family leave, either to care for a sick family member or if they themselves have a serious illness. It's not just like if you have a cold, but if you have a serious illness, or for the birth of a child. So that's a strong priority that we're moving forward on. The climate solutions bill has passed, and it's going through the final motions now. So I would say those are the big things that we've worked on this session. I don't know if they fall into specific categories.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to make sure that we can also include our our co-host in the discussion about the Transit Equity Act, Transportation Equity Act 2022. Now, this isn't the first time it has appeared, frankly, in the legislature. It has a history. Do you mind giving us a bit of that history from the first appearance in the session last year to now, just how it has fared?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And really, as you would expect, this bill came from Samuel. Samuel came to me. He has a long history of working on these issues. And so he came to me and said that he asked if I would be interested in introducing a bill for transportation equity. This was about 2 years ago now. And he had specific elements in mind that he wanted to ensure were in the bill. It was to codify at the state level, to make sure that the state is doing transit equity analysis whenever they're making service changes, but also to do cost benefit analysis, community outreach, and to provide alternatives to ensure that there is an equitable solution. And so from that time, Samuel and I worked together for months trying to build and refine this bill and get it. And from there, that was the core that we built on. and we added other provisions to it, and really ended up with a very strong bill that I introduced in the 2021 session. Unfortunately, the bill came in with a very large fiscal note. The fiscal note, of course, is what Department of Legislative Services estimates that the bill will cost. The fiscal note was over $10 million over 5 years, $10.7 million over 5 years. And so it's very, very difficult to get things passed through the legislature that have a cost associated with them, because there's always a concern about the purse strings. And so it didn't get any, we tried to get it passed in the 2021 session. It didn't get any traction because of this fiscal note. We started talking to MDOT and MTA to try to figure out, how we could get that fiscal note down. And Delegate Brooke Learman really helped me to connect with them and help to really advocate for the bill. And so through talking with them, we put in some amendments. These amendments were really just designed to simplify the timeline on things, and also to ensure that it was working with their way. So some of what the fiscal note was, they were thinking that things had to be done off cycle, and just trying to clarify that things could be done on their normal cycles and things like that. So with that work, we got the fiscal note down to, I think at the beginning of this session, it was $7.7 million over 5 years. So, and we had, at the hearing in the 2022 session, we had over 50, that's 50, supportive testimony submitted, a huge number of organizations and individuals supporting it, and no opposition whatsoever. So the support was huge, with no discernible opposition, but it still had a fiscal note of 7.7 million, which was too high. So went back, talked to MDOT some more and MTA, made some more changes, got the fiscal note reduced. Now it was down to about 3.9 million. So that was enough that we started getting some traction and some movement. And Delegate Learman, again, was advocating for it with the committee chairs and with everybody that needed to, sign off on this. And so eventually what happened was it went to the subcommittee, and the subcommittee amended it to remove one part of it, which was the Commission on Transportation Equity. When that part was removed, now the bill moved. So it was voted out of subcommittee. It was voted out of the committee. It went on the floor and it passed the House. The same thing in the Senate. It passed the committee. It passed the Senate. And so now it's in the process of each bill has to cross over to each bill crossed over to the other side and now has to pass the opposite chamber. And just today, they came out with a revised fiscal note based on the current form that the bill is in, and it's now down to about 2 million over 5 years. And the cost in FY23, which is the fiscal year that starts in July, is zero. And then it's like about 500,000 in each year after that.
Very good.
And so it's looking very good for passage.
Yes, Minister Smith, you have any comments or questions that you want to
direct
to Delegate Ruth?
I do. I want to first of all thank Delegate Ruth for her. I'm going to call her a champion, because when we came to this work after the cancellation, when I came to the work after the cancellation of the red line, we didn't have a lot of advocates on transit issues that affected our communities in Annapolis. I don't know if that was because of MDOT, MTA, the bureaucratic power that they may possess there, but there were some challenges that needed to bring transit to the point where it was serving the people it was supposed to serve. So I applaud you, and I don't envy you for that 90-day session. I've been down to see the hustle and bustle when people trying to get bills in and things of that nature. But I wanted to thank you very much. And
if I could just interrupt, could I just interrupt for a minute? I just want to give credit also to Senator Jill Carter, who has been a
Oh,
great champion of this in the
yes,
Senate.
definitely, Senator Carter. She's been a real champion, and you know, it took a while to actually be able to get you know, people to come in and rally to the cause. So I thank you for that, and this bill I think will do. Had it been in place back in 2015, possibly we'd be riding the red line today. So I want to give you kudos and thank you. And Delegate Carter, you guys worked like yeomen getting this through. So I just really want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know,
And certainly, I mean, when we were crafting this bill, we very much had in mind the red line, and we wanted to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again, because it's absolutely disgusting that it was canceled with no community input, no cost benefit analysis, just the wave of a hand, and decades of work is gone. And we're turning almost $1 billion to the federal government.
and you know, with Senator Carter's background, you know, she was the director of Baltimore's Office of Civil Rights, so she was attuned to our uh, the urgency of our getting some passage at the state level of the provisions of the Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So we've always noted how there's public transportation is racially conflicted wherever people of color live. But she adopted a slogan that she also rolled out at the rally on Friday, that she says over and over: end apartheid in public transportation.
That's
But I
right.
want to ask this question. You know, there's a language in the session, first reader, second reader, third reader, and so what does that mean? The when you have a first reader, why do we need three readers? I mean, what is going on in the what will the average person who doesn't get to Annapolis understand that our legislators and representatives are doing when there's a second and a third reader and we still don't have the law actually passed?
It's complicated. There's a lot of steps that it has to go through, but the first reader just means it's introduced. After a first reader, it's then assigned to a committee. In this case, in the Senate, it's the Finance Committee, and in the House, it's the Environment and Transportation Committee. The committee has a public hearing on it where anyone can submit testimony, sign up to testify orally. Then the committee will vote on it. If the committee votes to what they call favorable. Favorable is yes, unfavorable is no. So if it comes out of the committee favorable, then it goes to second reader on the floor. When we say the floor, we mean the full House. And so second reader is basically just approving the committee's report. It's not actually passing the legislation. It's basically saying we accept the committee's report and we're getting it ready for final approval. Second reader is also where amendments can be introduced on the floor. So amendments can be introduced in committee, and all the amendments on this bill were introduced in committee, but you will often see particularly a lot of Republican amendments offered on the floor. And so second reader is where those can be offered. Once it passes second reader, then it goes to third reader in the following session or a following session. And third reader is the actual vote to approve. So it has to be voted to approve in both the Senate and in the House. And then the bill crosses over to the opposite chamber. So the Senate bill comes to the House bill comes to the Senate, and each one has to vote again to approve the opposite chamber bill. So it's a lot of steps. Then it
Well,
goes to the governor.
well, when you have the first, second, and third reader, and as with the Transportation Equity Act of 2022, we got what would appear, at least by the numbers, a veto-proof majority in both houses. But we still can't yet celebrate the fact that it will become law. Why is that true?
Well, thank you for that question. And the fact is, it still has to go to the governor. So it has one more step in the Senate, and then it's going to go to the governor. I'm hoping that it will go to the governor this week, because things are a little different because it's an election year. And to have the best chance of passage, it needs to go to the governor by this Friday. And so then the governor has three options. He can sign a bill, he can veto a bill, which means he kills it essentially, or he can do nothing. And if he does nothing after a certain period of time, it becomes law automatically. If he vetoes it, it then can come back to us, to the legislature, where we can vote to override the veto.
I see. So, with respect to the prospects for the Transit Equity Act of 2022, HB 141, SB 23, it looks good, and we're proud of the progress it's made. I think we can call this a major step forward. Uh, what happens, for example, or is there anything else to do in subsequent sessions? Where do you see it being most effective? Is it at a place now where you think it will get some of the results that we were seeking initially?
I think it's a very strong start. It's not an ending; it's a start, and we're going to have to come back and keep working on this. But you know what we lost is the commission, and I think that commission was charged with doing some really important work. And whether or not that work gets done by a commission or in some other way, we need to come back next year and to make sure that work gets done one way or the other. But what we did keep was the initial core that you brought to me, Samuel, the transit equity analysis, cost benefit analysis, outreach to affected communities, and alternatives. Those are still in the. So we do have a very strong core, and I think it will make a difference in helping to ensure that there's not disparate impact when they make these service changes. There's also still some requirements that that equity be considered in their Maryland transportation plan. And also they are required to report on some racially disaggregated data, which will help also. But yes, it's a start, and we definitely need to come back next year and build on that.
Well, let me mention this, Delegate Ruth, and we'll certainly let you have the last word on this. But one of the major features of the bill for us always was there is this anomaly in the nation. Now, you see, we're going through this dispute about whether or not democracy is going to survive. Well, Title VI in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act were very clear, definitive statements by the courts at that time that exercise of the full franchise is a right of every citizen. In fact, everybody in the nation, but particularly the enfranchised citizen, voter. However, the provisions of Title VI, a federal statute, were never really applied or enforced at the state level. So when there was slack enforcement at the federal level, we got no protection. And in other words, the so-called protected classes in Title VI were never really protected. This is an opportunity for Maryland to take the lead and be the very first state to get on the path of enforcing the Title VI protections at the state level. That's key to us. We want our audience who know these numbers of the bills that we've mentioned, HB 84, education and criminals, having students locked up, handcuffed at school, SB 119. HB 610, SB 493 is the Universal Health Care System bill. And the Energy and Waters bill, HB 772, SB 494. Remember those, friends, and make sure that your delegates, your senators, are supportive. Delegate Ruth, thank you so much for being our guest. So we're going to let you tell us what you think is best for us to, how the voters can be supportive, what else there is we can do in this session to make certain that your management of this bill, the Transit Equity Act of 2022, is a successful tour of this legislative session.
Well, thank you so much. And I think it's important to continue advocating with your legislators. If you don't know who your legislators are, you can look them up. One place to look them up is a website called MDElect, MDELECT.net. You can look up who your legislators are. You have a state senator, and then you have between 1 and 3 state delegates. And definitely send them an email or call their office and ask them to support HB 141 and SB 23. If you can do that tomorrow, that would be great. Or even tonight, right now, sit down and send them an email, because this is moving, but we need to continue to push it moving. You can also, I think, write to the governor and ask him to support it. But it's important to continue to advocate for this, even after it passes, which will hopefully be tomorrow, because then if it's vetoed, we need to make sure that we do the veto override as well. So it's really important to continue to contact your legislators and ask them to support these bills.
Thank you so much. And for our audience, I can say that we've had a fine discussion of the legislative session and of this bill, Transportation Equity Act of 2022. But the key always is, especially with Delegate Ruth and Senator Carter, when we fight, we win. Cuando ganamos, cuando luchamos, ganamos. When we fight, we win. Thank you so much, Delegate Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Certainly.
There's a lady on the town hall.